Special Operations Training Detachment, SOT-D West, Burrow Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. The ability to effectively and efficiently communicate is essential for military operations. On the modern battlefield, this can look like many things from tactical radios, commercial means, or leveraging cyber and space domains. The need to communicate, however, creates risk by emitting a signal on the electromagnetic spectrum. The modern battlefield requires soldiers and leaders to balance digital force protection with mission command. With us today to discuss communications and digital force protection is Sergeant Kai Ramirez, the Communications Sergeant for Burrow Team. Kai, please briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kai Ramirez. I work at Burrow Team. I've been there for about 2 years. I joined up in 2019. I'm a 25 Sierra SATCOM systems operator maintainer. I did 2 years at Fort Riley, Kansas, doing tactical SATCOM, and then a year in the Middle East doing strategic. And then I got the job here as the S6/space cyber and everything else in between.
Yeah. So you mentioned it. It's not just communications like your MOS, but you do have to branch out and know stuff in the space, in the cyberspace areas, because we cover those as much as we can, doing multi-domain operations throughout our rotations here at the National Training Center. But we'll focus on more leaning towards your MOS at first, and then we'll broaden out into those other things as we go through our conversation. So what are some challenges you've seen that training units come here, like we train RSOF units, special operations units specifically? What are challenges they have with communications?
So I think the biggest challenge we run into out here consistently is that systems integration. So we're talking BCT to the SOF elements. It takes time to integrate and backtrack. I think the last 20 years have been very SOF focused in communication development, whereas the conventional forces have kind of lagged in SOF development or in communications development. So trying to bridge that gap. A lot of systems are just not compatible, and a few of them are, but it takes a whole lot of work to get them to link, and the amount of time that it takes to do that usually just isn't available. Like trying to make that link up at LTP, it's probably too late.
Yeah, really? LTP with somewhere in the neighborhood of 180 to 90 days before rotation, that's too late to make a link up for your communications infrastructure to work on ground? I
think so. I mean, we've seen elements, because I've been asking, right? When are you linking up with the communication sections with the BCTs? And generally it's at LTP.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there is a initial planning conference that happens before the leadership training program here at the National Training Center. But like for the bulk of the staff, like LTP is the first time they're going to integrate. And for that RSOF unit, which is typically a special forces company, their AOB staff and commander and hopefully the liaison package that they're bringing, like that's their time to really have that face-to-face with the rotational brigade. But you're saying that's too late?
I honestly think so.
Okay.
I think the beauty of the Army structure is a lot of SOF units are co-located with conventional forces.
That's true for the most part, yes.
The conventional Army very conveniently fields pretty much the same equipment at every BCT everywhere.
True.
So if you can get these processes, because the problem is they're coming out and they're facing problems they weren't aware of when they get on ground. And working through those issues while you have the time and convenience is generally something that would be beneficial.
So what I'm hearing you say is, like, even though it might not be the brigade you're partnering with at your CTC rotation, go across the street at your home station, find a brigade, and get linked in with their S6 and try to figure out how to make your comms talk to a conventional unit.
Yeah, I think that honestly is probably the best answer to the problem we have consistently here is that lack of communication.
And is that like on tactical communications, and then even on if they're running behind the FLOT, they could be running SATCOM or have like internet-based communications and have NIPR and SIPR and all that stuff. Like across the board, that connectivity between SOF and CF is just not there.
I think so. And we see it here, right? Because the brigades will come out and they'll run something called tactical SIPR.
Yep. So
which
it's
is
closed network.
Which is not a real internet enclave.
Yep.
And we have a lot of issues usually discovered for the first time by the RTU when they get on ground and can't communicate due to the differences between the enclaves.
Yeah.
So
all the brigades products are on tactical SIPR. All the soft products are on soft SIPR, and they don't communicate.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So even though hopefully there's a liaison element sitting in the brigade with the brigade that is representative of our SOF, they can't share products readily between each other. So they may end up briefing off of computers or something of the like to show the brigade this is what the SOF elements are doing out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great growing point for like working analog products. But, you know, I don't learn very well off a PowerPoint slide. I don't know how well you do, but
only the best. Yeah. Okay. So what has been you're trying to coach training units? I mean, it's after the fact, at the end of their rotation. Hey, when did you guys link up with your counterpart? Oh, at LTP, or even after that. Okay, well, 6 months wasn't enough lead time to cross a lot of these gaps. Do we see, like, in the rotation, are they able to get some connectivity across the tactical and for lack of a better word, I'll call it administrative comms platforms?
I think we've seen some success. Usually there are hurdles that just can't be climbed over in 12 days.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking huge 20 years of infrastructure differences between SOF and conventional forces that just we're trying to mash together in 12 days and hopefully fix. And I think it's unreasonable to ask RTU to do that, but they come and try their best anyways.
Yeah. Okay. So like on the, individual ground unit level, I've seen a special forces operational detachment actually like go link up prior to infill into the box and find the cav unit that they're like, okay, that's going to be the forward unit of the brigade. And if we have to do a reverse passage of line, like that's who we're going to hit first. And they were able to get their fills for their tactical radios. And then come days later, when they did have to do this RPOL, they switched the radio that, the Special Forces team's using, switched their frequency to what the CAV was using, and they were able to make far recognition electronically. That's my best success story, because typically I haven't seen teams hunting down adjacent units to get all of the fills, and then like that could have just as easily not worked, because the brigade could have enacted some kind of commo pace plan in the event that their comms got degraded or disrupted by the enemy. Then, like, I don't know, back when I was a platoon leader, we had a code word. Hey, you switch your Julian date, forward, back, whatever, if you hear this word, and then that's gonna get the enemy off of our channel. So, like, I don't know if Black Horse is not getting on tactical comms as much these days to try and interrupt the brigade, but like that one team was successful at cross-talking via like a 152 or some other tactical radio to the CAV unit and doing that reverse passes of line. But I've seen it one time since I've been here. I don't know if you've heard of any other like good success stories at the tactical level.
I mean, we've seen some good success with like bringing out the same equipment, JBCP's units bringing.
Okay, yeah, that's true too.
Bringing equipment that is fielded at the BCT.
Yeah. And
152s are kind of beautiful in the fact that they can talk to the Army's older radio systems and the newer SOF specific stuff. Yeah. So they're kind of a really good bridge point. But really, the big hang up we see a lot is the issuing of keys and getting fills from subordinate units, because brigades are tend to be more strict when it comes to issuing those out than SOF elements might be used to.
Yeah.
So the processes involved in receiving keys to a unit that may not be under your general guidance is a long one.
Yeah, for sure. But like, I have never, at least since being in special operations myself, seen it go in reverse where the SOF unit's willing to give a fill or a key to a conventional unit. They're always asking for that. And I think that's, operational security mindset and maybe not the best answer at times, but because we do need to be able to talk across formations if we want to be able to have the most effects that we can.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up there, where SOF maybe is not generally sharing back that responsibility of cryptological information. But I do think that the onus is on the SOF side in the sense that if you're operating in the division deep, you're in the division's battle space.
Yeah,
they're the battle space owner. So if you want to communicate and make sure that your NFAs or no fire areas and your named areas of interest are coordinating with the division's battle maneuvers, it's on you to bridge that communication gap.
No, absolutely. Yeah. If you want division assets or if you want joint assets, like you have to be able to communicate that. And in some regards, that's through your chain of command and then either coordinating or liaisoning elements. At some point, though, there is a combined joint task force or something of the like way up there at Starfleet level that's in charge of everybody. But if you have the permissions and authorities to reach across instead of up, and then over and then all the way down, like you're going to be able to get effects, kinetic or non-kinetic, much faster, or resources, if you need logistical support or medical support or something of the like. And we've seen that both, people struggle with that and people be successful at, I can think in a simple example, an SF team out there in front of the forward line of troops, and they have direct communications with the RSOF LNO that's sitting at brigade, and that person's able to speak on their behalf, and that their commander at the AOB or the Special Operations Task Force level has okayed, down to the detachment level, you guys can talk to each other, because it ends up being, a captain or a senior NCO talking to another captain or a senior NCO directly, and then they go talk to some brigade staff folks about whatever it is. Usually at the National Training Center, we're requesting fires of some kind is a big one. So like, hey, can we get brigade or division fires to do terminal guidance, and we'll do terminal guidance on this like piece of high value target that we see out here in the division deep. But if they don't have that ability to reach directly to like their liaison, then it's going to take that extra long time to go up and over and down. Besides getting with the conventional unit, any conventional unit, and figuring out systems, is there any other recommendations you have on how best to bridge that, or like get over the hurdle, that challenge of getting soft technology to talk to conventional commo equipment?
Self-experimentation.
Okay.
I think everybody in the Army is task saturated and time constrained. I think is a good way to put it. And even for me, I have a hard time staying up with what equipment capabilities are.
Yeah.
New things are always coming out, and that's kind of the beauty of the IT space. That if you're not ahead, if you're not current, you're behind.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of teams have a hard time knowing the full capabilities of what they are have available to them, and bust out a TM, figure out what that training manual says on what frequencies you can put into. I think Black Horse here has a really good track record of implementing old equipment to great effects here at NTC. I think their stuff is maybe 10 years, 15 years behind the rest of the BCTs, the conventional BCTs, and they are killing it every rotation.
Oh, yeah. They do. They have a great understanding of the electronic space. And I mean, it is their backyard. They get 8 to 10 reps of this every year, whereas a normal brigade gets one. So, but they are very effective. They have a good understanding of the electronic warfare and the electromagnetic spectrum and how that looks. And then they can pinpoint that using all sorts of maybe outdated equipment, but like even just down to the good forward observer or recon element that confirms or denies what they're seeing via other means. Last like big thing about comms, what kind of equipment, what kind of comms architecture is pretty normal for a SOF unit? Like, are they being effective with it? Is there something that they're missing?
I think we've seen a bunch of different layouts, and I think the beauty of SOF and the way your funding and acquisition processes are different than the conventional forces, you get a lot of different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we've had a rotation where everybody's brought the same thing. We have Starlinks,
Yeah.
we have Star Shields from the Department of Defense version,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a whole bunch of different green radios going from VHF to HF. And I think generally what we see that's most effective and I think matters more than the piece of equipment is something that they practiced with.
Okay. That's a good point.
Whether it's, we see it all the time, is teams will come out here and they'll try to be very quiet. They'll enter the box with good command guidance and then have questions and have to maybe put themselves at risks that they weren't necessarily prepared for because they thought they had good enough command guidance when they entered the conflict. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that is something going on the mission command kind of vein, which is something we talk about a lot on this podcast. Understanding, trying to get ambiguity out of guidance and like, hey, here's your left and right limits and the things that you need to accomplish. And then if you don't have the ability to communicate, that those down trace units can go do those things. And then eventually report back or through some means get that information back. But I have seen like, hey, we're only going to do this and we're going to have comms windows, and then a couple days go by and that kind of all falls apart, and then they rely on whatever the easy button is. I think you nailed it on the head when you said practice, because if you don't practice with some piece of equipment, you're definitely not going to use it. And then you're going to go to whatever the most simple one is, which modern technology with, being able to do SATCOM, giving you near real-time communication, like that's pretty simple. And it doesn't take hardly any practice, but then you end up getting jumbled information. You're not using reporting formats, and we don't have to go down all that because those are conversations we've also had with other folks on the podcast. But like, absolutely practice with your equipment. Is there like HF? I want to ask about HF for a second, because it was something when I was in first group was talked about a lot. And I know that it seems like this daunting thing. Yeah, there's math involved and you got to do the right angles and right distance for your antenna. And then sometimes they're like, well, the sun and the moon and the stars and the water table aren't aligning to make this happen. I've seen teams be good at it or successful at it, and teams be not successful. Is HF a good frequency range for them to be trying to communicate on?
I think when we talk like digital force protection,
yeah,
HF might be the answer to most of our problems, right? I think that the digital force protection question with near-peer adversaries in the scenario we have here at NTC, HF is the solution to most of the dilemmas, but it is a dilemma.
Okay.
Right. With most HF platforms, you run into data limitations or latency, and then it is a little bit of black magic with the atmosphere and the heat on the ground and the moisture in the ground playing some factors that you may not be considering in a gunfight.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not something you're doing on the move realistically or in a tick. Like, you got to be kind of deliberate. So that's a good point.
Yeah. But it is something that I am taking a personal interest in here in developing and testing with our friends at Black Horse, uh, using, a fishpole whip. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but it can, like a conventional fishing pole, tent pole antenna
Okay. Gotcha.
attached
I
to
haven't heard of that one.
an HF radio.
I was thinking like fling wire, like
Yeah.
just throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean it's a solid antenna. Used to come with the 1523s. All the old guys who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, Sergeant G probably remembers them fairly well. It's just a old school fiberglass antenna, but we think we can hit 500 miles
Okay.
with that on an HF radio in low power.
Okay.
So we're going to do some testing, but in theory, your AOB, well, on the friendly side of the front line of troops,
Mm-hmm.
and then you in the rear, are in the deep, whatever we are calling the deep extended deep,
Mm-hmm.
probably a 500-mile bubble,
Yeah.
depending on weather conditions, with a man-packable radio
Yeah.
that doesn't require an hour for you to set up, and that's voice and data. We think you should be able to receive with some decent fidelity that will require a significant amount of money and manpower to hunt.
Yeah.
Which
So
is,
for data, you think like a picture could get sent over that?
I think you could probably do different kinds of picture formats.
Yeah, not a raw file.
I wouldn't expect to send anything in 4K over it,
Yeah.
but at least text, you could probably get a pretty decent 5-paragraph op order in obviously clear and concise, but
Yeah.
we think it would work pretty well, because that's the biggest grievance we've had with teams who come out here and try to do HF. Is they're like, I don't want to send up my big old box antenna and throw out a long wire.
Yeah. Well, I mean, depending on what you're trying to do and how far you're trying to make your comm shot means what kind of wire, what kind of antenna you're going to use for HF. Because, I mean, HF can go from 0 meters to around the world if, you do your calculations correct. But, like, you need to also have a base station to be transmitting to. So you got to shoot the azimuth to the base station, which, like, in our construct could be more at the Special Operations Task Force or the Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force that's like hundreds of miles away behind the friendly line of troops in a safe, secure location. Because maybe, yes, SF companies, AOBs come out here, but they usually are mobile. So, like, maybe that's not the right entity to try and be communicating with HF. And you got to do something more like expedient that's higher potential of getting spotted on the electromagnetic spectrum. Maybe that's SATCOM, maybe that's VHF or UHF, depending on the proximity. Because I mean, like, VHF is pretty easy and straightforward to use, but it's limited by line of sight. So, like, depending on where you're at in the box, you could get a VHF shot, maybe like 20K, but one direction, and then nowhere the other direction if you're next to a mountain range or something. But awesome. Is there anything? Well, we'll move on to talking about space and cyberspace before we go down more of a rabbit hole about electromagnetic spectrum and your other job of being target team and hunting the ODAs and such, what you do while you're out here in rotation. But getting people prepared to do missions in space and cyberspace domains, like what have you learned while you've been here, and what do you see that works, and what do you suggest to training units coming out here?
So I think it's a tough question, right? Because I feel like we have to clarify what SOF's element in space and cyber is. And I think we don't have clear guidance. I believe it's conduct space and cyber operations.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? We're always templating, like, well, maybe it looks like this, or maybe it looks like this. But I think generally where we're falling short is at the maybe it's due to lack of like clear guidance on it, but like teams and AOBs generally don't have understandings of the baseline capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the benefits of conducting a cyber operation or a space operation versus a more traditional raid or assault?
Yeah.
and I think they're maybe not as sexy.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh,
Easier to say, like, I destroyed a target and I took, X number of enemy combatants off the battlefield, or this piece of equipment, rather than like we disrupted their satellite communications for 30 minutes. And because we did that, we allowed the joint force to do a uncontested entry operation, penetration 10 kilometers, and then they airfield seizure this place, or they breach this obstacle, and yada, yada, yada. Reinforcements were delayed an hour because of what we did. Like, that could be huge. That could be more meaningful than destroying something, but it doesn't brief as well. Or it doesn't sound as cool doing it.
Definitely
maybe this is a better thing to do. Yeah, it takes more explanation of like, well, what are we really doing here? I'm just trying to think of like some examples to maybe get a listener to like, oh, hey, if we go to the National Training Center, we can hit these mission essential tasks, and hopefully they're more creative than I. But like over a year ago, we had a team bring a space soldier into the box with them, and he used a specific piece of equipment that would have terrestrially jammed satellite communications. And that was a big risk because that emits a big electronic signature that the enemy can detect. And that was to enable the maneuver force, the brigade, and their entities to do an attack, to probably disrupt a reserve element or something like that, so that the brigade could actually establish a foothold and expand a lodgment. And then for cyber, we do things like get remote access into networks and stuff, but I really don't. I never OC'd a team that did a cyber mission, so I'm at a loss for a good example of that one.
I mean, the cyber operations we conduct here are templating, like semi-real world infrastructure, focusing on the concept of air-gapped networks.
Okay.
So that's where SOF really comes in, is your network, your access and emplacement gives you the opportunity to access a network that is key to battle space, whether it's power or infrastructure. I know we have like a dam templated.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a military, in the scenario, it's not necessarily something that belongs to the enemy military. It's just something that they may be using, or something that is going to negatively affect them, or in the information space, we can attribute it to them as being a negative outcome. Like you mentioned, a power station, like, hey, we shut the power off, but we're messaging that the enemy combatants actually shut the power off, and XYZ, you don't want them around here, so support the coalition, the U.S. coalition forces, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and the key SOF element of that aspect is that network doesn't touch anything else, so thus air gapped. So that's generally where we think SOF fits in, right? Is if we don't have access, because 11 cyber could technically, or another cyber element, technically touch it. If it touched the internet organically, they could touch it from here in the States.
Okay.
But the access and placement that SOF is templated to have will give them, a body in the infrastructure to bridge that. That's why it's a remote access device.
Okay.
So it gives them remote access to a network that otherwise doesn't normally touch stuff, for mainly security reasons.
Yeah. And we've seen AOBs bring like 17 series to assist in the planning and execution of those operations, and then people that have gone to Brighton or whatever. Thank you for listening to this episode where Kai and I discussed challenges for integrating SOF and conventional communications, the importance of practicing with your equipment, and incorporating space and cyber at the tactical level. In next episode, we will cover digital force protection and the differences between SOF and conventional electromagnetic signature.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform. Actions will determine the outcome.